Hey Garth, good to see you.
Jason, always a pleasure, my friend. Great to see you. You're looking good. You're looking
Hey
good.
man, thanks. Thanks. I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
It's a big day, right? We're recording this on Super Bowl Sunday, and
Super Bowl Sunday.
we always
ABC.
get.
ABC. Anyone but the Chiefs.
I'm cheering for the Chiefs today, and
Oh,
my whole family's
oh,
up for it, and we have a little family Super
oh.
Bowl party here. So I'm looking forward to it. We're gonna hit the basement, watch the TV, and eat some nachos as a family, and watch the game. We'll see who takes it down.
All right. All right. Hey, Jason, speaking of Super Bowls, often,
Mm.
you're having a party. What is the best party you've ever been to?
Oh, well, that's a good question, Garth. I've had the good fortune of being to a lot of good parties. And I think the best party I could think of top of my mind is I have a friend who'd always invite us to a Ukrainian Christmas party.
Oh,
But it wasn't just a Ukrainian Christmas party. It was a kind of a, multicultural potluck of sorts. So certainly, we got together and celebrate Ukrainian Christmas because that was our heritage. But they invited everybody to bring something that was close to them to support the meal. So,
nice.
if you're from different places in the world, you bring something that
Ah,
was, for you. And
so
of
good.
course, we celebrate Ukrainian Christmas. It's always turned into a lot of fun. There would
Yeah.
always end in, a lot of dancing and a good night. So yeah, that was the party. What about you? Tell me about a good party you've been to.
No, I want to stay on your party. Are you Ukrainian?
No, 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 I'm
No.
not. I'm Irish.
You're Irish, but you felt
Yeah.
like you belonged at that party.
Oh, certainly, 100%. I think that was the beauty of it, Garth. Everybody felt like they belonged and they were contributing to it. I think that
Yeah.
was part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in today's episode, how's this for a segue? In today's episode, we actually use the analogy of a party to help explain what it means to move your organization into one where people feel not only included, but they feel like they belong. And
Hmm.
that's a great analogy for us to use in order to understand how to lead with inclusivity and respect at the core of your leadership.
Yeah, and I think people are going to enjoy this episode, and I think this series of episode because we are taking inclusivity from where it's at and bringing it to belonging. And I think
Yeah.
there's a lot to be learned, a lot to think about, and a lot to listen to here, Garth. So
Yeah.
I really hope people enjoy this episode.
Yeah. Go birds.
Here we go, Chiefs.
With Garth and Jason, we dive right in, breaking down Ted's world. Let's begin from AFC, Richmond's field to your day to day. Lassoing leadership's here to stay. Keep leading the lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show. With lessons from Ted, we'll learn and grow.
Welcome back to Lassoing Leadership, folks. I'm your host, Garth Nichols.
And I'm Jason Rogers, and today we're diving into a theme that's central to great leadership, leading with inclusivity and respect.
Yeah, this is one that's been on my mind of late. As leaders, we often talk about building trust, fostering resilience, supporting our teams, and we've had amazing conversations about psychological safety, and I think that might come up later, but none of that is possible without a foundation of inclusivity and respect. And the truth is, creating inclusive spaces takes intentional work. It doesn't just happen on its own, Jason.
That's so true, Garth. I've talked about this before, how important it is to us as, men in education to be aware of a privilege we carry and the responsibilities we have in shaping inclusive cultures. I think coming back to that idea of where everybody belongs and they can find their place. I think we'll talk a little bit more about belonging, as I think it's central to an awful lot of what we're going to talk about here. We don't
Yeah.
have all the answers. I think that's part of it. But I think by virtue of doing podcasts like this and having these conversations and continuing to dig into it, we're committed to learning and listening and making spaces for voices that need to be heard in these conversations.
Yeah, you're so right, and that's sort of what I fall back on is like we have the bandwidth and the ability to make this podcast. So who are we able to pass the mic to, I think is really important. And who's our listeners too, and how are they spreading that word? And part of this this series of 3 is going to be really great for me because I'll get to talk about this book here. It's called Outraged. And the actual book cover is bright orange, but it's written by Kurt Gray, who is Canadian, but he leads the center at Duke University in North Carolina.
Okay.
It's a fascinating book, and it looks at how our world is outraged, especially in the context of social justice, and how outrage can be a powerful force for change. But also, he talks about the barriers to meaningful dialogue and how are we avoided, or how are we making it more difficult for us to have civil discourse in the world?
Yeah, I think there's something there, Garth, and I really do appreciate the notion of outrage, but also appreciate the notion of civil discourse. I really think that opportunity to sit and listen and learn and be a part of a conversation is something that's lost when we end up in a place of battle or combat. And so I hope that we can come around to this conversation by virtue of this podcast and other ones that other conversations we'll have in the future. But so what stood out for you about outrage? Tell me a little bit more.
Well, for me, the thesis of the book is pretty interesting. And his thesis is that basically as a world, and indeed in North American society, particularly in the United States and Canada, his thesis is that we have actually never been more safe, more taken care of. The world's never been more predictable. And as the world becomes safer and safer, our brains are still, back in the day and always heightened for harm. So his thesis is that if you get, shoved the wrong way in, waiting for the subway or public transportation, that is harm. That is something that you need to respond to. When something doesn't go your way, you are more likely to, quote unquote, fly off the handle. And so that's one of the big takeaways is the thesis itself. And then he uses amazing science and his experiments and his research to talk about moral humility, talk about how we're more similar than we think we are, but that we have these mental models that we need to overcome to create a more civil discourse and actually bridge across our differences. Super cool.
Well, it's interesting. I saw a really prominent thinker and scholar speak about 2 years ago, and he came forward with a fairly similar thesis. And what he sat back and said was, if you're to look at today versus 30, 50, 100, 500 years ago, most of the key indicators for a civil society are improving. So he said, there's less famine, there's less war, there's less poverty, there's less. We are safer and generally better off as a globe, as a world. But at the same time, we perceive exactly the opposite, and there seems to be a little bit paradoxical kind of mind shift happening here. So I think that idea of outrage is very, very compelling. I think that's a really interesting thesis and a really great point. But inclusivity isn't just about making sure everybody feels welcome. It's how do we handle that discomfort? Similar to what you're saying, how do we have the hard conversations, and frankly, how do we continue to seek to understand our own blind spots? And I think that goes for you and I in our positions of privilege, but also everybody really trying to understand each other's blind spots. I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, he in the book, he draws on some really interesting research, and I think the power of this book is that. Well, let me start with this way, Jason. He offers 3 key tips, right, to overcome these bridges, and he talks about connection, telling stories about your own personal experiences, and then he talks about invitation, invite people to tell their stories, and then he talks about validation, so understanding and reaching out. His distinction here is that you're not connecting and inviting and validating in order to persuade someone. You are doing that so that they feel understood. And these are things that we know to be true already. We've talked about connection, invitation, validation on our podcast. But what makes this book super powerful is now you know why. like neurologically, now you can understand what's going on in the brain. And that makes this all the more powerful for me. So listeners, check this out. It's Outraged. It's by Kurt Gray. I'm going to do a quick book review on it in the next couple of days, but it is excellent.
And I think you're right, Garth. I think we've been talking about this for about 2 years, these ideas of connection, invitation, validation. I think, some really great coaches in my life have always said, you've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that ratio. Yeah. But I think beyond that, I think that idea of active listening without being compelled to have a response or being compelled to have a position, I think is a really important skill that we all need to continue to develop in our leadership. And I think it's a really hard thing to do, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I mean, that all really does lead to something I wanted to bring into today's discussion when I'm thinking about this topic. I think a great definition of inclusive leadership comes from Harvard Business Review. I mean, we come back to HBR often in this podcast, and they define inclusive leadership as leaders who ensure that all team members feel they're treated respectfully and fairly and valued and have a sense of belonging. Back to that core definition of pluralism where everybody belongs. It's about actively seeking out different perspectives and making sure people feel safe to contribute. And I think, important in this definition is actively seeking out different perspectives. It's easy to be passive and happy and polite and content and all of those things. But I think if you move yourself into actively seeking out different perspectives, then that's when your mind and perspective may start to open just a little bit further.
Yeah. And that's invitation, right? I need you to tell me more information. So I really love that solid definition. For our listeners, I would add a great analogy. And this analogy, I think, has been around for a while, but I'm going to reference Jeff Hutchinson. He wrote this in 2020. This is actually just on his LinkedIn, Jeff Hutchinson. He says, the party, an analogy of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. And so he writes this analogy about being invited to a party. And basically, equity is having an accessibility ramp to the door of the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance or being offered refreshments or being asked to help clean up or be a part of it. Belonging is actually helping to decide the music, the playlist, the decorations, the food. The best party is always the one you hate to leave because you feel like it's your party. It becomes your party when you are part of it, sharing responsibility according to your talents and not sitting around hoping to fit in. So that's Jeff Hutchinson. I really love that last part about belonging, right? It becomes your party when you're a part of it and you're sharing responsibility. We spoke about that not long ago in terms of creating a vision, right? You want to make sure that people feel that that vision is their own. So yeah, inclusivity, building these rooms where people feel it's a shared responsibility.
Yeah, and I think like from a school leadership standpoint, we could think about this about our teams and our staff. How engaged are they in wanting to have the party, whatever the party is, whether it's a co-curricular, or it's a social event, or it's teaching and learning. Like how involved, how engaged, how much ownership do they have in that process? And I think your analogy is just a great one for school leaders to sit back and think about the teams that surround them and wonder about those team members in that. And so I love that. And it moves beyond good intentions.
Yeah, you can even hear we've talked about psychological safety in the past. You can even hear the work of Dr. Edmondson in there, making sure that people feel not only safe to contribute, but that it is their responsibility to be a part of this team and to lift this team up.
Oh, that's super sharp. I'm glad you added that, Garth. I mean, true inclusivity requires action, right? And speaking of action, Harvard also has a great article, titled "What Inclusive Leaders Sound Like," that I think our listeners would really benefit from. It breaks down practical ways that leaders can make their words and actions create inclusive spaces. We'll be sure to link that and the other resources in the show notes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's actually referenced in this, Outraged as well, powerful questions. And he writes, there's nothing more affirming than someone who is trying to understand your perspective by asking good questions. I just love that. right? So that'll be linked in the show notes too. So that's great. And I think this all connects actually really well with our next guest, who's a great colleague of mine, Nicole Cozier, the Executive Director of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Havergal College. She's doing some incredible work in building an inclusive school, what that a culture of belonging looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And she's done some great work at our school, so I'm thrilled that she's going to be sharing it with our listeners. And I know she's going to challenge us, Jason, to think even deeper about what it means to lead with respect and equity.
It's always going to be wonderful to have another school leader and practitioner on the show so we can have an opportunity to pick her brain about the way she sees the world and ask some good questions. And I think more than anything, listen to her perspective and bring her into this podcast. I hope she finds a place of belonging in the Lassoing Leadership podcast verse. And I can't wait for the conversation. I think it's going to be really valuable because she doesn't bring only just expertise, but also practical strategies and making inclusivity lived truly. And hopefully we'll just continue to bring it past being a buzzword.
Yeah. So as we close out today's discussion, dear listeners, let's leave you with something to reflect on. Jason, what's one thing you think leaders should ask themselves when thinking about inclusivity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Garth. And I think, I think this is an important consideration even beyond inclusivity in your leadership. But if you ask yourself whose voice or whose voices are missing from this table, you take a deep dive on who's going to be involved, who's going to be impacted, whose, world might change a little bit. Then I think that's a great way to frame it up. So whose voices are missing from this table? And if you look around your leadership team, your classroom, or even your personal circle, and you're the only, hearing perspective that aligns with your own, that might be a problem. And we have to be intentional about making space for diversity of voice in everything that we do.
Yeah, that's a great one, Jason. I appreciate that. For me, I'd add, am I listening to understand?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or am I listening to respond? Right. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Am I listening to persuade someone else, or am I listening to understand? So often when we engage in discussions around this work of equity and inclusion, our instinct is to explain ourselves or to defend ourselves. But real leadership, I think, and you'd agree for sure, is sitting in this discomfort, sitting in the unknown, absorbing new perspectives, and ultimately asking yourself, how can I do better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and Garth, I love that. And I think if that guides our leadership, we're off to a really, really strong start. And listeners, we want to hear from you. I think these will be conversations that we'll love to have and be able to listen to in the days ahead. So what are your biggest challenges you face when you think about leading through inclusivity? Send us your questions to lassoingleadership@gmail.com or connect us with LinkedIn, Spotify, Instagram, in the hallways or on our telephones.
Yeah, and Nicole is a dear colleague of mine. So if you have any questions about fostering inclusive leadership, please do send them our way.
Amazing. And our next episode's coming up next week with Nicole. So if, we look forward to hearing from you. And I think we're getting close to a wrap, Garth. That's bringing us to the end of this one. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with your friends and colleagues.
And as always, keep leading the Lasso way. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye now.
Step up to the mic. It's time to play. Lassoing leadership every day. From the pitch to the boardroom, lessons call to mind. Keep leading the Lasso way. You'll find we've got heart, we've got soul, and humor too. Exploring how TED shows what leaders should do. With Garth and Jason, we dive right in, breaking down TED's world. Let's begin from AFC, Richmond's Field to your day-to-day. Lassoing leadership's here to stay. Keep leading the Lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start the show. With lessons from TED, we'll learn.